I discovered a cancer treatment technology that could save millions of lives, but my boss Jackson had other plans. For years, he took credit for my innovations while I worked in the shadows. When Nexapharm offered $500 million to acquire our company, Jackson blocked my access to the deal room. "This is above your pay grade," he smirked. What Jackson never realized was that I had secretly filed a personal patent months earlier. His face would soon change when the buyer's legal team received my licensing demand 4 hours before signing. 8 years at BioCure Innovations taught me more about corporate politics than biotechnology, and I considered myself an expert in both. I started as a research assistant with bright eyes and boundless optimism, gradually working my way up to lead innovation specialist. The path wasn't easy, especially as a woman in a male-dominated industry, but my determination ran deep. My passion for medical research wasn't just professional. When I was 12, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. As a single parent who worked 2 jobs to support us, she fought bravely but succumbed to the disease 18 months later. I still remember her final words to me: "Susanna, use that brilliant mind to help others." That promise guided every decision I made, from studying biochemistry at Northwestern to pursuing specialized research in targeted drug delivery systems. BioCure was a mid-size biotech firm in Chicago with about 200 employees. Our CEO, Thomas Grant, was a former researcher himself who understood the science but remained distant from day-to-day operations. My direct boss, Jackson Palmer, headed the research and development department. Tall, with perfectly styled salt and pepper hair and custom suits, Jackson had mastered the art of impressing executives while doing minimal actual research. His real talent lay in selecting promising projects, inserting himself at critical junctures, and emerging with credit for breakthroughs. My closest ally was Amanda Turner, a fellow researcher whose friendship kept me sane through countless late nights in the lab. The other key player was Gail Peterson, our HR director, who played golf with Jackson every Sunday and conveniently overlooked his pattern of credit theft. 3 years ago, I began developing a revolutionary targeted delivery system for cancer treatments. Current therapies often damage healthy cells alongside cancerous ones, creating devastating side effects. My approach used a novel protein coating that could transport medication directly to cancer cells while leaving healthy tissue untouched. The potential was enormous. More effective treatments, fewer side effects, and higher survival rates. The work consumed me. I sacrificed weekends, holidays, and relationships. My boyfriend at the time couldn't understand why I regularly canceled plans to return to the lab. "It's just a job," he'd argue before eventually leaving. But to me, it wasn't just a job. It was the fulfillment of a promise to my mother and potentially life-saving technology for millions. As the project progressed, I noticed Jackson's increasing interest. He began stopping by my lab more frequently, asking detailed questions about my methodology. I thought he was finally recognizing my work, perhaps even considering me for the promotion I'd been chasing for years. Then came the day that changed everything. I was working late, the lab empty except for me. An email notification popped up on my computer. FWD, R&D, Quarterly Review. The sender was Thomas's assistant, and it had clearly been sent to me by mistake. I opened it to find a presentation Jackson had given to the executive team earlier that day. Scrolling through, my heart raced as I realized he was presenting my research as his own. My charts, my data, my protein delivery mechanism, all labeled with his name. The final slide even proposed a Palmer protein shield as the marketing term. Everything suddenly clicked into place. The reason I'd been repeatedly passed over for promotion despite my innovations. The reason Jackson could afford a vacation home in Aspen despite his mediocre salary. The reason I remained invisible despite driving our most promising research forward. I printed the presentation, hands shaking with a mixture of rage and validation. After years of suspecting I was being undermined, I finally had proof. But what could I do? Jackson was connected throughout the industry. If I confronted him, I might be labeled as difficult and find myself unemployable. If I went to Thomas, it would be my word against Jackson's, and executives tend to protect their own. That night, I made two decisions that would ultimately change everything. First, I would document everything meticulously going forward. Second, I would protect my most innovative work by developing key components on my own time, using my personal equipment. It wasn't ideal, but it was the only insurance policy available to me. Little did I know that both decisions would soon be tested in ways I never imagined. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Subject line: Potential acquisition interest. Confidential. Thomas had forwarded a message from Nexapharm, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. They had seen Jackson present his targeted delivery research at the Boston Biotech Conference and were interested in potential acquisition talks. The office exploded with excitement. Nexapharm acquisitions were legendary in our industry. They paid premium prices and typically retained key staff with generous compensation packages. Numbers started circulating. 300 million, 400 million, possibly $500 million. For a company our size, this was life-changing. For me, the emotions were mixed. The technology Nexapharm wanted was primarily my creation, yet Jackson was positioned to take the credit and likely a massive personal bonus. Still, this level of interest validated years of my work. If the acquisition went through, my research would reach patients faster than BioCure could manage alone. Thomas called an all-hands meeting that afternoon. This is preliminary, but Nexapharm has expressed serious interest in acquiring BioCure, primarily for our cancer treatment delivery technology, he announced to the crowded conference room. Their due diligence team will arrive next Monday for a 2-week evaluation period. I need everyone's full cooperation to make this successful, he continued. Jackson will lead the technical presentation team, and he'll select key personnel to support the due diligence process. All eyes turned to Jackson, who stood with practiced humility. This technology represents years of our collective work, he said, conveniently using our when speaking to the full team. I'm proud of what we've accomplished together. Later that afternoon, Jackson called me into his office. I braced myself, expecting to be sidelined completely. Susanna, I need you to prepare the technical materials for the due diligence process, he said, surprising me. All the research notes, trial results, everything. You know the details better than anyone. Of course, I replied, trying to hide my shock. When do you need it? By Friday. Their team arrives Monday morning, 3 days to compile 3 years of complex research. It was nearly impossible, but also an opportunity I couldn't refuse. I'll have it ready, I promised. The next 72 hours became a blur. I practically lived in the office, organizing thousands of pages of research, creating simplified explanations for non-technical reviewers, and preparing answers to likely questions. Amanda helped when she could, bringing me food and occasionally forcing me to take breaks. They wouldn't have a deal without your work, she reminded me during one late-night coffee run. Make sure they know that. My boyfriend Scott was incredibly supportive. despite seeing me for only a few hours that week. We'd been dating for about 10 months, and unlike my ex, he understood my dedication. As a software engineer, he recognized the importance of intellectual property and encouraged me to stand up for my contributions. "Just make sure you're in those meetings," he advised. During a quick dinner, I squeezed in Thursday night. "Once they start asking technical questions, they'll realize who really developed this technology." I nodded, but uncertainty gnawed at me. Jackson was a master of presentation and office politics. He knew enough about the science to sound convincing to non-specialists. Would the Nexafarm team dig deep enough to see beyond his polished facade? By Friday afternoon, I had compiled everything into organized digital folders and printed executive summaries. Exhausted but proud, I delivered the materials to Jackson's office. "Excellent work, Susanna," he said, flipping through the binders. "This looks very thorough. I'd like to participate in the technical discussions next week," I said, trying to sound casual. "There will likely be questions I can help address." Jackson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's see how the schedule develops. There will be lots of high-level corporate discussions that aren't relevant to research staff." I pushed back gently. "But the technology is why they're interested. I developed most of the—" "We developed," Jackson corrected smoothly. "It was a team effort, as I've always acknowledged. I'll make sure your contributions are recognized appropriately." I left his office with a sinking feeling. The weekend passed in anxious anticipation. Sunday night, I received a calendar invitation from Jackson for a pre-meeting briefing at 7:30 Monday morning. Perhaps he was planning to include me after all. I arrived early Monday, professionally dressed in my best suit, prepared for the most important meetings of my career. The office had been transformed overnight. The lobby featured new furniture and a giant welcome sign for Nexafarm. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, and the kitchen was stocked with gourmet snacks. Jackson's briefing turned out to be just him and me in his office. He closed the door before speaking. "Change of plans, Susanna. I need you to lead the Miller Project while I handle the Nexafarm meetings." The Miller Project was a stalled research initiative of minimal importance. The reassignment was clearly meant to keep me occupied and away from the acquisition team. "But I prepared all the materials," I protested. "I know this technology better than anyone. The Nexafarm team will have technical questions that—" "This decision comes from Thomas," Jackson interrupted, though I suspected that was a lie. "The Miller Project needs immediate attention, and you're the best person for it. This acquisition involves complex corporate matters above your pay grade." There it was, the dismissal wrapped in a compliment, a technique Jackson had mastered. "I've reorganized your materials for the presentations," he added, gesturing to my binders, which I noticed had been completely rearranged. "Don't worry. I'll make sure the technical details are covered." As I left his office, I passed the main conference room where the Nexafarm team would be arriving shortly. Through the glass wall, I could see my technical summaries spread across the table, now with Jackson's name prominently displayed on the cover pages. My original versions, which clearly outlined my role as lead researcher, were nowhere to be seen. The twist of betrayal cut deep, but I wasn't entirely surprised. What I didn't expect was what I discovered later that day when Amanda secretly brought me a copy of the revised technical overview Jackson had distributed to the Nexafarm team. My name appeared only once, buried in a long list of supporting research personnel. 3 years of my life's work reduced to a footnote. The Nexafarm team arrived with the precision of a military operation. From my reassigned desk near the fire exit, I watched as 10 people in impeccable suits entered our lobby. Their lead negotiator was a silver-haired man named Richard Cooper, but the person who caught my attention was the woman beside him, Julia Warren, Nexipharm's chief legal counsel. She had sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate everything and everyone with laser precision. Jackson greeted them with practiced charm, leading them to the executive conference room that had been prepped for their arrival. Thomas joined them, along with our CFO and legal team. I wasn't invited, despite being the creator of the technology they were there to acquire. For the next 2 days, I tried to focus on the Miller project, while constantly finding excuses to walk past the glass-walled conference room. Jackson held court inside, pointing confidently at my slides and data. Occasionally, I'd noticed Julia Warren asking questions that made him pause longer than he should have. Good, I thought. At least someone was digging deeper. On Wednesday morning, Amanda stopped by my desk with a coffee and a whispered update. "They're asking very specific questions about the protein coding mechanism," she said. "Jackson's struggling to explain the molecular binding process you developed. Is anyone pointing out that he's not the researcher who developed it?" I asked. Amanda gave me a sympathetic look. "He keeps referring to his team and his research direction. Thomas doesn't know any different." During lunch, I stationed myself in the hallway, hoping to catch one of the Nexipharm representatives. When their team emerged from the conference room, I approached Julia Warren directly. "Excuse me, Miss Warren? I'm Susana Martinez, the lead researcher on the targeted delivery system you're evaluating." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Interesting. You haven't been in our meetings." Before I could respond, Jackson appeared beside us as if materialized from thin air. "Susana is one of our lab technicians," he explained smoothly. "She's currently working on another priority project. Julia, I believe we're discussing the patent portfolio after lunch?" "Yes, we are," she replied, studying me with those perceptive eyes. "Perhaps Miss Martinez could join us, since she seems familiar with the technology." Jackson's smile remained fixed. "Unfortunately, she's needed elsewhere. Our technical team has everything covered." He placed a firm hand on my shoulder, steering me away. Once out of earshot, his voice turned to ice. "What do you think you're doing? These discussions are confidential and by invitation only." "They're evaluating my research," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I should be in those meetings." "Your research?" His laugh was dismissive. "You helped run some tests under my direction. Don't overstate your role." That afternoon, I tried to speak with Thomas, catching him alone in the hallway. "Thomas, I need to discuss the Nexipharm meetings with you. There's something important." "Not now, Susana," he cut me off, checking his watch. "We're in the middle of critical negotiations. Whatever it is can wait until next week." By Thursday, the acquisition talks were progressing rapidly. The office buzzed with excitement about a possible $500 million valuation. Administrative staff had already begun speculating about their bonuses, while researchers discussed which Nexipharm facilities they might transfer to. I felt increasingly invisible, watching from the sidelines as my life's work was being sold without my involvement. That evening, I confided in Amanda over drinks at a bar far enough from the office to speak freely. "I don't understand how Jackson gets away with this," I said, staring into my barely touched wine. "He can barely explain the basic methodology, let alone the innovations that make it valuable." Amanda sighed. "This isn't the first time. Remember Trevor from immunology? His antibody stabilization technique earned Jackson the Brenner Award last year. Trevor quit a month later." "What happened to him?" I asked. "Last I heard, he was working for a startup in San Diego. signed an NDA about why he left BioCure. She leaned forward. Susanna, you need to decide what you're going to do. Once this acquisition goes through, it'll be too late. I nodded, but what could I do? The negotiations were already in advanced stages. Even if I managed to speak with the Nexapharm team, would they care who developed the technology as long as they acquired the patents? The next morning brought the breaking point. I arrived early, hoping to catch Thomas before the meetings began. As I approached the executive floor, I overheard voices from the small kitchen area. Jackson was speaking with Julia Warren. Between us, the technical implementation was challenging, he was saying. Susana Martinez is just a lab technician who helped run some tests. Bright enough, but limited in her understanding of the broader implications. I had to completely rethink her approach to make the delivery system viable. My hands clenched into fists as I listened to him dismiss 3 years of my innovation. But Julia's response surprised me. That's not what her publication history suggests, she replied coolly. I did some research last night. She co-authored 3 papers on targeted protein delivery before joining BioCure. You weren't listed on any of them. There was a pause before Jackson responded. Those were theoretical papers. The practical application required significant refinement under my guidance. I'd heard enough. I stepped into view, making both of them turn. Miss Warren, I'd be happy to discuss those papers and how they informed the development of our current technology, I offered. Jackson's face flushed with anger. Susanna, you're needed in the lab immediately. I'll have to ask you to excuse us. Actually, Julia began, I'd be interested in hearing— I'm sorry, but we have a schedule to maintain, Jackson interrupted firmly. Security will show Miss Martinez back to her authorized area. As if on cue, our head of security appeared beside me. Jackson must have texted him the moment he saw me. Please escort Miss Martinez to the research wing, Jackson instructed him. She's not authorized for the executive floor during these meetings. I had no choice but to follow the security guard to the elevator, aware of curious stares from colleagues as I was essentially perp-walked through the office. The humiliation burned through me as the elevator doors closed. Back at my desk, I sat in stunned silence. After everything I'd contributed to this company, I was being treated like an intruder. The acquisition would soon be finalized. Jackson would receive accolades and likely a massive bonus, and my innovations would belong to Nexapharm without any recognition of my role in creating them. For the first time since my mother died, I left work in the middle of the day. I couldn't bear to stay in that building another minute. As the office doors closed behind me, something inside me shifted. The resignation and acceptance that had allowed Jackson to exploit me for years hardened into resolve. I would no longer be erased. I arrived home to an empty apartment, grateful that Scott was still at work. I needed time alone to process what had happened and decide my next steps. Tossing my bag aside, I collapsed onto the couch and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of the betrayal. 8 years at BioCure, countless 60-hour weeks, holidays spent in the lab instead of with family, all leading to this moment where I was literally escorted away from the meetings discussing my own innovation. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. You okay? That was seriously messed up. I didn't respond immediately. What could I say? That I was fine? That was a lie. That I was quitting? That would only give Jackson what he wanted. Instead, I walked to my home office and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside was a folder labeled Personal Research. I spread the contents across my desk. Detailed notes on the key components of my delivery system that I had developed on weekends and evenings using my personal equipment. Next to it lay a document I'd almost forgotten, about a patent application filed 6 months ago. The memory of that decision came flooding back. After discovering Jackson had presented my previous research as his own, I'd gotten strategic about my most promising innovations. The core delivery mechanism belonged to BioCure. I'd developed it on company time using company resources, but the specialized protein coating that made the system truly revolutionary, that I had developed independently, documenting my process meticulously, to establish it as separate from my work obligations. At the time, I hadn't been certain the patent application was the right move. I'd consulted with a patent attorney named Frank Daniels, who specialized in biotech intellectual property. "Based on what you've shown me," Frank had said after reviewing my documentation, "you have a legitimate claim to this specific innovation as independent intellectual property. You developed it outside company time, using your own resources, and it's distinct from your assigned projects. But won't BioCure claim ownership anyway?" I'd asked. "They might try, especially if they discover it after you've filed. But your documentation is solid. The key is that this component wasn't part of your assigned duties, and you developed it independently." I'd filed the application the next day, telling no one except Scott, who had encouraged me to protect myself. The patent was still pending, but Frank had assured me that the filing date established my priority claim. Now, looking at the application, I wondered if this was my leverage. If Nexapharm was paying $500 million for the technology, a significant portion of that value came from the component I had independently patented. Without my protein coating, the delivery system would be just another incremental improvement on existing technology. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Scott. "Amanda texted me what happened," he said when I answered. "Are you okay?" "No," I admitted. "I was escorted out of the executive floor by security." Jackson told Julia Warren, "I'm just a lab technician." Scott's voice hardened. "This has gone too far, Susanna. You need to fight back." "How?" "The acquisition is almost finalized. No one's listening to me." "What about your patent application, the one for the protein coating?" I glanced down at the papers spread across my desk. It's still pending, and even if it were granted, taking on BioCure legally would be career suicide. "So would letting Jackson steal the most important innovation of your career," Scott pointed out. "At least with legal action, you'd have a chance at recognition and compensation." We talked for nearly an hour, weighing options and consequences. By the time we hung up, I still hadn't made a decision. I needed more information about where the acquisition stood. I texted Amanda. "Any updates on the Nexapharm deal?" Her response came quickly, moving fast. "Final terms being discussed tomorrow. Rumor is they're signing Monday. 3 days. If I was going to act, it would need to be soon." I spent the evening researching similar patent cases, trying to gauge my chances if I asserted my rights. Around 10:30, my phone buzzed with another text from Amanda. This one contained a photo that made my heart race. "Found this on the printer. Thought you should see it." The image showed a page from what appeared to be the draft acquisition agreement. My eyes locked on a paragraph labeled Innovation Bonus Structure. It outlined how the $500 million payment would be distributed, including a $50 million personal bonus to Jackson Palmer as the key innovator behind the technology. $50 million for my work, while I would receive nothing beyond my regular salary. Something snapped inside me. The injustice was too blatant, too extreme to ignore. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone and called Frank Daniels. Despite the late hour, he answered on the third ring. Susanna, is everything all right? No, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I need your help. Remember that patent application we filed for my protein coding technology? I need to assert my rights immediately. Frank was silent for a moment. This is about the Nexapharm acquisition of BioCure, isn't it? It's been in the industry news. Yes. They're paying $500 million primarily for my technology, but I've been completely sidelined. My boss is taking credit and will receive a $50 million personal bonus. And you want to what? Block the acquisition? Not necessarily. But I want recognition for my innovation and appropriate compensation. Frank's tone turned serious. Susanna, you should understand what you're potentially unleashing. Once we send a formal notice asserting your patent rights, there's no going back. BioCure will likely terminate you. They might sue for breach of contract. Your professional reputation could suffer if they paint you as disgruntled or opportunistic. I took a deep breath. I understand the risks, but the alternative is watching someone else take credit and compensation for my life's work. The work I did for my mother. The mention of my mother seemed to resonate with Frank. He knew her story and how it drove my research. Okay, he said finally. If you're certain, I'll prepare a formal licensing demand to send to Nexapharm's legal team. We'll assert that their acquisition cannot proceed without addressing your patent rights to a key component of the technology. How quickly can you do this? I can have it ready by tomorrow afternoon. But Susanna, one last time, are you absolutely sure? This will change everything. Was I sure? I thought about Jackson's smirk as he dismissed me from the executive floor. I thought about 3 years of working nights and weekends on research that could help cancer patients like my mother. I thought about the $50 million bonus that would reward Jackson's theft rather than my innovation. I'm sure, I said firmly. Send the licensing demand. That night, I barely slept. I alternated between certainty that I was doing the right thing and panic about the potential fallout. What if I lost everything: my job, my professional reputation, my financial security? What if BioCure's lawyers found some loophole in my patent claim? But beneath the fear ran a current of resolve. For too long, I had allowed others to take credit for my work. This time would be different. The next morning, I called in sick to BioCure, unable to face the office while knowing what I had set in motion. Frank called around 2 in the afternoon. It's ready, he said. I've prepared the licensing demand to Nexapharm, asserting your rights to the protein coding technology and stating that any acquisition of BioCure must include separate licensing arrangements with you as the patent holder. Send it, I said, my heart pounding. I'll deliver it electronically to Julia Warren and their legal team immediately, Frank confirmed. Expect significant reaction within hours. After we hung up, I sat in my living room, watching the minutes tick by on the wall clock. 3:15, 3:45, 4:30. The licensing demand had been delivered, but so far, nothing had happened. Had Nexapharm dismissed it? Was BioCure already preparing my termination paperwork? At 5:17, my phone rang. The caller ID showed BioCure's main number. This was it, I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. Hello? Susanna Martinez? It was Thomas's assistant. Mr. Grant requests your immediate presence at a special board meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Your attendance is mandatory. I understand, I replied. I'll be there. After hanging up, I immediately called Frank. They've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. What do I do? Be there, he advised. Don't volunteer information. Answer questions truthfully, but concisely. Remember that anything you say could be used in potential litigation. I spent the evening preparing with Scott, who helped me anticipate questions and practice my responses. We ordered takeout but barely ate, both too anxious about what the next day would bring. "Whatever happens," Scott said as we finally went to bed, "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." I kissed him, grateful for his support, but inside I wondered, had I just committed career suicide, or was I finally claiming what was rightfully mine? The next morning dawned with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Whatever happened in that board meeting would forever change my life. I dressed carefully in a navy suit that projected confidence without aggression, applied minimal makeup, and pulled my hair back in a simple but polished style. Scott made coffee while I reviewed my notes one final time. "Remember," he said as I prepared to leave, "you did nothing wrong. You protected your intellectual property according to the law." I nodded, kissed him goodbye, and headed toward BioCure for what might be the last time. The lobby was unusually quiet when I arrived at 7:45. The receptionist, who normally greeted me warmly, avoided eye contact as she directed me to the top-floor boardroom. The elevator ride felt eternal. With each floor, my resolve wavered slightly, then strengthened. I thought of my mother, of her strength during her cancer treatments, of her belief in me. This was not just about money or credit. It was about fulfilling my promise to her that I would make a difference. As the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, I took a deep breath and stepped out. The hallway to the boardroom seemed longer than usual. Through the glass walls, I could see a group already assembled inside. My steps faltered when I realized it wasn't just BioCure's board waiting for me. Seated around our massive conference table were BioCure's executives on one side, and what appeared to be Nexapharm's entire leadership team on the other. Thomas sat at the head of the table, flanked by our company counsel. Jackson occupied a prominent position, his expression thunderous. Across from him sat Julia Warren, beside a distinguished woman I recognized from industry publications as Diane Fletcher, Nexapharm's CEO. All conversations ceased as I entered the room. Every head turned toward me, expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. The silence was oppressive. Thomas broke it first. "Miss Martinez, please take a seat." He gestured to a single chair positioned at the foot of the table, isolated from everyone else. I moved to the chair with deliberate calm, despite my racing heart. Setting my portfolio on the table, I nodded politely to everyone, including Jackson, whose face had turned an alarming shade of red. Thomas cleared his throat. "For those who may not be familiar, this is Susana Martinez, a researcher in our oncology division. Miss Martinez, we've called this emergency meeting to address the document that was delivered to Nexapharm's legal team yesterday afternoon." Jackson couldn't contain himself. "This is corporate sabotage, plain and simple," he exploded, slamming his hand on the table. "She's trying to hijack the biggest deal in our company's history for personal gain." Thomas held up a hand to silence him. "We'll maintain professional decorum, Jackson." Turning to me, he continued, "Miss Martinez, our legal team has reviewed your patent application. You claim to have developed the protein coding technology independently, outside your work obligations at BioCure. Is that correct?" All eyes fixed on me, waiting for my response. I straightened my shoulders and spoke clearly. "Yes, that's correct. The core delivery system was developed as part of my assigned projects at BioCure. However, the specialized protein coding that makes the system uniquely effective was developed during my personal time, using my own resources, over weekends and evenings." BioCure's lead counsel, a stern woman named Patricia Wells, spoke next. Your employment contract clearly states that all intellectual property related to your field of work belongs to BioCure, regardless of when or where it was developed. I had anticipated this. With respect, Miss Wells, the contract specifically refers to intellectual property developed within the scope of my assigned duties or using company resources. The protein coding technology was neither part of my assigned projects nor developed using BioCure equipment or materials. I have extensive documentation demonstrating the independent nature of this work. Patricia's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Julia Warren interjected. Our technical team has reviewed the patent application, she said, her precise voice cutting through the tension. The protein coding technology represents a significant portion of what makes this delivery system valuable to Nexapharm. If Miss Martinez indeed holds valid patent rights to this component, it materially affects our acquisition evaluation. Jackson scoffed loudly. This is absurd. She's a junior researcher who assisted with my project. Now that it's successful, she's trying to claim credit. I turned to face him directly. I led the development of this technology for 3 years, Jackson. My name appears only once in the materials you provided to Nexapharm, listed as supporting research personnel. You've systematically erased my contributions while positioning yourself to receive a $50 million personal bonus for my innovation. A murmur ran through the room. Thomas looked startled, while several Nexapharm executives exchanged glances. That's a serious accusation, Thomas said carefully. It's also demonstrably true, I replied, opening my portfolio. I've maintained records of my contributions, including emails where Jackson specifically instructed me to remove my name from presentations and reports before they went to executive leadership. Jackson's face paled slightly. That's standard protocol for streamlining communications. Diane Fletcher spoke for the first time, her authoritative voice silencing the room. Mr. Grant, while the ownership dispute is concerning, equally troubling is the apparent discrepancy regarding who actually developed this technology. Our due diligence process relies on direct access to the true innovators behind the assets we're acquiring. Thomas looked increasingly uncomfortable. Miss Martinez has been a valued researcher at BioCure, but Jackson Palmer has led our cancer research initiatives for 8 years. I couldn't let this stand. Ask him a technical question about the protein coding, I suggested. Any question about its molecular structure or binding mechanism. Jackson's expression shifted from anger to something approaching panic. This is completely inappropriate. We're here to discuss a legal matter, not conduct a scientific examination. Julia Warren seized on my suggestion. Actually, I have several technical questions that arose during our evaluation. She opened a folder and extracted a page of notes. Mr. Palmer, could you explain how the hydrophobic regions of the protein coating maintain stability while traversing the bloodstream's varying pH levels? Jackson hesitated, then offered a vague explanation about protein folding that any first-year biochemistry student would recognize as superficial. Julia's expression revealed she wasn't satisfied. Miss Martinez, would you care to address the same question? She asked. I provided a detailed explanation of the specialized amino acid sequences I had designed to create dynamic stability across different environments, including specific molecular mechanisms that allowed the coating to respond to environmental changes without compromising its targeting function. The contrast between our answers hung in the air. Several Nexapharm scientists nodded appreciatively at my explanation, while Thomas looked increasingly troubled. Julia continued, with several more technical questions, each revealing the same pattern. Jackson offering generalities, me providing specific, sophisticated answers that demonstrated intimate familiarity with the technology. A tense silence followed the impromptu examination. Thomas finally broke it, addressing both companies' legal teams. Perhaps we should discuss the patent situation privately before proceeding further. Before anyone could respond, the boardroom door opened. Amanda entered, carrying a digital tablet and looking nervous but determined. "I apologize for the interruption," she said, "but I have information directly relevant to this discussion." Jackson immediately objected. "This is a closed meeting. She has no authorization to be here." "Actually," Diane Fletcher interjected, "as potential acquirers, we're interested in all relevant information. Please continue, Miss Turner." "Amanda Turner," she supplied. "I'm a senior researcher in the oncology division, working alongside Susanna for the past 5 years." Amanda approached the table and placed her tablet in the center. "I've compiled a documentation package that I believe will help clarify the situation." She tapped the screen, and a series of files appeared. "This contains time-stamped research notes, email exchanges, and recorded lab meetings that demonstrate Susanna's role as the primary developer of both the delivery system and the protein coding technology." She navigated to a specific folder. These files show the evolution of the project over 3 years, with Susanna leading every major breakthrough. They also document a pattern of Jackson taking credit for Susanna's work in presentations to leadership, while minimizing her contributions in official records. Jackson exploded from his chair. "This is a coordinated attack. You've clearly conspired to undermine me and this acquisition." "The emails are from BioCure's secure server," Amanda replied calmly. "They can be authenticated by IT. I've also included statements from 6 other researchers who witnessed Susanna's development of the technology and Jackson's pattern of credit appropriation." The room erupted in tense conversation. Legal teams huddled together, while executives whispered urgently. I sat perfectly still, feeling simultaneously vindicated and terrified. There was no going back now. After several minutes of consultation, Diane Fletcher rose from her seat. Her commanding presence immediately quieted the room. "In light of these serious concerns regarding both intellectual property rights and the accuracy of information provided during our due diligence process, Nexapharm is pausing all acquisition activities effective immediately." The announcement hit like a thunderclap. BioCure executives looked stricken. "We will need to reassess the technology ownership structure and valuation before proceeding," Diane continued. "Our revised timeline will depend on how quickly these issues can be resolved." Thomas looked devastated. "Miss Fletcher, surely we can address these concerns without delaying the entire process. The core technology still holds tremendous value." "Undoubtedly," Diane agreed. "But we cannot proceed with $500 million in acquisition funds while fundamental questions about ownership and development remain unresolved. We'll reconvene when your company has clarified these matters." With that, the Nexapharm team gathered their materials and prepared to depart. As they filed past me, Julia Warren paused briefly. "That was quite a risk you took, Miss Martinez," she said quietly. "Truth shouldn't be risky," I replied. She offered a slight smile before following her colleagues out. The boardroom door had barely closed behind them when Jackson launched into a tirade. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he shouted at me. "Years of work toward this acquisition potentially destroyed because you couldn't accept your role on the team." Thomas silenced him with a sharp gesture. "That's enough, Jackson." His expression was grim as he addressed the remaining executives. "The board will need to meet privately to discuss next steps." "Miss Martinez, Miss Turner, you're both dismissed for now. Consider yourselves on administrative leave with pay until this situation is resolved." As Amanda and I left the boardroom, I could feel the weight of what had just happened settling over me. The acquisition was paused. My career at BioCure was effectively over, regardless of how this played out. But for the first time in years, I had spoken my truth and stood up for my work. In the elevator, Amanda squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing, Susanna. Whatever happens next, remember that." I nodded, uncertain whether to feel triumphant or terrified about what would follow. The only certainty was that nothing would ever be the same again. The next 3 days passed in excruciating slowness. Administrative leave meant I was barred from entering BioCure's facilities and cut off from company communications. Frank advised me to avoid contacting colleagues and to direct any inquiries about the situation to him. The biotech industry thrived on gossip, and news of the paused acquisition spread quickly. My phone filled with messages from former classmates and professional acquaintances seeking details, which I politely declined to provide. Scott was my rock during this limbo, reminding me to eat when anxiety killed my appetite and distracting me with hikes and movies when rumination threatened to overwhelm me. Amanda checked in daily, reporting that the office had essentially split into factions, those who believed my claims and those who considered me a traitor for endangering the acquisition. "Jackson's on the warpath," she texted on the second day. "Legal team reviewing everything you've ever touched at BioCure." On the morning of the 4th day, Thomas's assistant called. "The board requests your presence for a meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m., she said formally. "Mr. Daniels is welcome to accompany you as your legal counsel." I immediately called Frank, who agreed to attend. This could be anything from a settlement offer to termination proceedings, he warned. Be prepared for both extremes. That evening, as Scott and I were discussing potential outcomes, my phone rang with an unknown number. "Susanna? Martinez?" a familiar voice asked when I answered. "Yes, this is she." "Julia Warren from Nexa Farm. Do you have a moment to speak privately?" My pulse quickened. "Of course." "I'm calling unofficially," she clarified. "This conversation isn't happening. Understood?" "Understood," I agreed, signaling to Scott that I needed privacy. I moved to our bedroom and closed the door. "Our technical team has completed a thorough evaluation of the protein coding technology described in your patent application," Julia continued. "Their assessment confirms it represents approximately 30% of the total value proposition of the delivery system." I remained silent, unsure where this was heading. "Nexa Farm is still interested in acquiring this technology," she said, "but we need clean intellectual property rights. The current situation is untenable." "I agree," I said cautiously. "If BioCure offers you a settlement tomorrow, consider it carefully. That's all I can say." She paused. "Good luck, Miss Martinez." The line went dead before I could respond. I emerged from the bedroom to find Scott waiting anxiously. After I recounted the conversation, he paced our living room excitedly. "This is huge, Susanna. Nexa Farm is essentially confirming your patent's value. They're pressuring BioCure to resolve this quickly, or they're walking away entirely," I countered, unwilling to embrace hope prematurely. "Either way, your position is stronger than it was 3 days ago," Scott insisted. That night, sleep eluded me. I rehearsed various scenarios in my mind, preparing responses to whatever BioCure might propose. By morning, I felt mentally exhausted but resolute. Whatever happened, I would face it with dignity and without compromising my principles. Frank met me outside BioCure's building at 8:45, his calm demeanor reassuring. "Remember, they called this meeting, which means they want something. Listen more than you speak, and don't accept any offer immediately, no matter how attractive it seems. I nodded, smoothing my jacket and squaring my shoulders before entering the building that had been my professional home for 8 years. The receptionist directed us to a different conference room than before, smaller and more intimate. As we approached, I was surprised to see not only BioCure's leadership team, but also Diane Fletcher and Julia Warren from Nexapharm. Frank and I exchanged glances as we entered. This wasn't the termination hearing we had anticipated. Thomas stood to greet us. Miss Martinez, Mr. Daniels, thank you for joining us. Please be seated. The atmosphere felt markedly different from our previous confrontation, tense, but not hostile. I noticed immediately that Jackson was absent. Before we begin, Thomas said once we were settled, I want to acknowledge that BioCure has conducted an internal investigation over the past 3 days regarding the development of our targeted delivery technology and the protein coding component. He looked uncomfortable but continued. Our findings indicate significant discrepancies between official records and actual contributions. For this, on behalf of BioCure, I extend an apology. We failed in our obligation to properly recognize and credit your work, Miss Martinez. The acknowledgement caught me off guard. Frank placed a warning hand on my arm, reminding me to stay composed. Thomas gestured to Patricia Wells, our legal counsel. We've also reviewed your patent application and the supporting documentation you provided. While there remain some questions about the application of your employment agreement, we recognize there's a legitimate basis for your claims, Patricia added. Rather than engaging in protracted litigation that would benefit neither party, BioCure proposes a resolution that acknowledges your contributions while allowing the acquisition to proceed. My heart raced as Thomas slid a document across the table. We've worked with Nexapharm to structure a revised acquisition approach. Frank picked up the document, and we reviewed it together. The proposal outlined a 2-part transaction. Nexapharm would acquire BioCure for $350 million, with a separate $150 million licensing agreement directly with me for rights to the protein coding technology. Additionally, Nexapharm would offer me a leadership position, heading research for their new oncology division. The figures made my head swim. $150 million, a leadership position, recognition of my innovation. Frank maintained his professional composure. What about Mr. Palmer? This proposal doesn't address his claims to the technology. Thomas's expression tightened. Jackson Palmer has been placed on administrative leave, pending a full review of his conduct. He is not part of this proposed resolution. Diane Fletcher spoke for the first time. Nexapharm values innovation and the innovators behind it. Our due diligence process revealed that you, Miss Martinez, are the primary architect of the technology we wish to acquire. We prefer to work directly with the actual creators rather than those who merely claim credit, Julia Warren added. The separate licensing structure recognizes your patent rights while allowing the broader acquisition to proceed. We believe this approach appropriately values each component of the technology. I looked to Frank, who nodded slightly, indicating the offer appeared legitimate. Still, I wasn't ready to simply accept it. The proposal is compelling, I acknowledged. However, I have concerns beyond my personal compensation. Such as? Thomas asked. My research team. They contributed significantly to this work, but have been equally overlooked. Any resolution should recognize their efforts as well. Thomas exchanged glances with the Nexapharm executives. What specifically are you proposing? A portion of the acquisition proceeds should be allocated as bonuses for the researchers who worked on this technology, and those who wish to continue this research should have opportunities at Nexafarm. Diane nodded approvingly. We're already planning to retain key research personnel. Specific bonus allocations would be BioCure's decision, but we would support recognizing the entire research team. Thomas considered this. We could allocate 5% of the acquisition proceeds as team bonuses, distributed based on contribution levels that you would help determine. 10%, I countered. Many of these researchers have dedicated years to this project with minimal recognition. After a brief consultation with other BioCure executives, Thomas agreed. 10% is acceptable, provided you work with HR to establish a fair distribution framework. I had one more condition. I want Amanda Turner offered a senior position on my team at Nexafarm. Without her courage in coming forward with documentation, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Julia smiled slightly. We've already noted Miss Turner's potential. That can certainly be arranged. For the next hour, we discussed details of the revised acquisition structure. The more we talked, the more real it became. This wasn't just a settlement. It was a complete transformation of my professional future. By the time we finished, the framework of an agreement was in place, with legal teams tasked to draft formal documents over the coming week. As the meeting concluded, Thomas asked to speak with me privately. Frank hesitated, but I assured him it was fine. When everyone else had left the room, Thomas sighed heavily. I owe you a personal apology, Susanna. I failed as a CEO by not ensuring proper credit for innovations within my company. His sincerity surprised me. Why didn't you ever question Jackson's sudden expertise in areas outside his background? I trusted my department heads to manage their teams ethically, he replied. That was clearly a mistake in Jackson's case. The investigation revealed a pattern of credit appropriation extending beyond just your work. What will happen to him? I asked, not out of concern but curiosity. That's still being determined. At minimum, termination for ethical violations. The board is also discussing potential legal action for misrepresentation that endangered the company. I nodded, finding no satisfaction in Jackson's downfall, only a sense that justice was finally being served. For what it's worth, Thomas added, you'll be an exceptional research leader at Nexafarm. The passion you've shown for your work and your team is exactly what drives true innovation. As I left the building, the spring sunshine felt brighter somehow. Frank shook my hand firmly. Congratulations, Susanna. You took an enormous risk, and it's paid off beyond what most could hope for. I thought of my mother, of her courage during her illness and her belief in my potential. The risk was necessary, I replied. Some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Walking home, I called Scott with the news. His joy echoed through the phone, planning celebrations and imagining our future. But beneath his excitement and mine, I felt something deeper shifting, a profound sense of reclaiming not just my work, but my voice, my power, and my promise to make a difference in the world. 3 months later, I stood in Nexafarm's gleaming headquarters, watching as executives and attorneys exchanged signatures on the final acquisition documents. The journey from that confrontation in BioCure's boardroom to this moment had been intense but transformative. The revised acquisition had proceeded smoothly, once ownership rights were clarified. BioCure received $350 million, with $35 million distributed among the research team members who had contributed to the technology. I signed a separate licensing agreement for $150 million for my patented protein coding technology, a sum so vast I still struggled to comprehend it. But more valuable than the money was the recognition. The press release announcing the acquisition prominently featured my role as the lead innovator behind the technology. Scientific journals that had previously published articles crediting Jackson now ran corrections and feature stories about the overlooked female scientist behind a cancer treatment breakthrough. Jackson had not gone quietly. He threatened lawsuits against both BioCure and me personally, claiming defamation and contract violations. His threats evaporated when faced with the mountain of evidence Amanda had compiled, documenting his pattern of credit theft. Last I heard, he had left the country for a position at a small research institute in Europe. His reputation in American biotech irreparably damaged. Amanda thrived in her new senior research position, finally receiving the recognition her talent deserved. The team we brought from BioCure formed the core of Nexapharm's new oncology research division, with several additional brilliant scientists recruited from around the world. Thomas Grant announced his retirement shortly after the acquisition closed, citing a desire to make way for leadership that better recognizes and nurtures innovation. His candor about the failures that had allowed Jackson's behavior earned him some measure of respect in his departure. As the signing ceremony concluded, Diane Fletcher raised a champagne glass to a partnership that will transform cancer treatment for millions of patients worldwide. The assembled executives and attorneys applauded, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Later that afternoon, I had a private moment in my new office overlooking the Boston skyline. I took out my wallet and removed a worn photograph of my mother, taken before her illness. Her smile radiated the same determination I'd tried to embody throughout this ordeal. I signed my name across the photo, a private ceremony to mark the fulfillment of my promise to her. The technology we were now accelerating through clinical trials might have saved her life had it existed 15 years earlier. While I couldn't change that past, I could ensure that future daughters wouldn't lose their mothers to the same disease. A knock at my door interrupted my reflection. Julia Warren entered, now a colleague rather than an adversary. "The legal team is finally dispersing," she said. "I thought you might want this." She handed me a bound document, my official patent certificate for the protein coding technology, newly arrived from the patent office. "Thank you," I said, running my fingers over the embossed seal. "You know," Julia commented, "when I first reviewed your patent claim, I admired your courage but questioned your judgment. Standing up against your employer and risking your entire career seemed foolhardy." I smiled. "It probably was, and yet here you are," she observed, leading our most promising research division with a 9-figure licensing agreement. "It wasn't about the money," I said, glancing at my mother's photo. "It was about fulfilling a promise and ensuring this technology would actually help patients." Julia nodded understanding. "That's precisely why you're the right person to lead this effort. Your commitment to the patients rather than just the profit is what will make this technology truly revolutionary." After she left, Scott called to confirm our dinner reservations to celebrate the closing. Our relationship had only strengthened through the ordeal, his unwavering support giving me courage when mine faltered. I looked out over the city, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. From the devastated 12-year-old girl losing her mother to cancer, to the researcher working endless hours in BioCure's labs, to the woman who finally stood up against injustice and claimed what was rightfully hers. The protein delivery system was now in accelerated FDA trials, with preliminary results showing remarkable effectiveness and minimal side effects. If all continued as projected, the treatment could be available to patients within 2 years, potentially saving countless lives. That evening at dinner, Scott raised his glass. "To your mother, who would be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished." I clinked my glass against his, emotion tightening my throat. and to standing up for what's right, even when it seems impossible. The most important lesson I learned through this journey wasn't about patents or corporate politics. It was about the responsibility we have to our own work and the people it might help. Standing up for your innovations isn't selfish. It's necessary to ensure they reach their full potential to change lives. I discovered that the real value of what we create isn't measured in acquisition dollars, but in the lives it touches. Sometimes, the most important patent you can hold is on your own courage, the willingness to face intimidation and fight for what matters, regardless of the personal cost. For those facing similar situations, remember that your work has value beyond what others might claim for themselves. Document your contributions, understand your rights, and never be afraid to assert them when necessary. The path may be difficult, but the alternative, allowing your innovations to be diminished or misdirected, can mean failing the very people you hope to help. Have you ever had to stand up for something you created or believed in, even when it seemed risky? How did you find the courage to take that stand? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to hear more stories of transformation, and share with someone who might need encouragement to fight for their own recognition. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember that sometimes the greatest innovations aren't just the ones we create in labs, but the moments when we find the strength to ensure they reach their full potential to help others.